Hello and welcome to our webinar. Today we're going to look at one of our assessment methods, professional discussion. And in this webinar, I'm going to be joined by Stacy Mann, our subject specialist in early years and childcare, and also Angela Rogers. Angie is our subject specialist in teaching and learning. And what we're going to do is develop a short role play, really, that gives examples of how a professional discussion, that conversation between two interested professionals, assessor, tutor, and student, actually focusing on a particular criterion. And the examples that we will use will be taken from our early years educator criteria, from the occupational specialism of the T level. But of course, a professional discussion may be something that's focused and planned for as part of a structured activity, but it could also be something that comes from a spontaneous activity following a holistic observation of a student. And therefore, this applies to all competency-based learning programs. So take from this webinar examples of how a professional discussion may look and feel, and also the examples that we are applying may be useful in particular when concentrating and focusing on our T level in early years. Okay, so throughout the webinar, Angie and Stacy will be taking the part of assessor or student in the role of a professional discussion. And we're going to start by looking at some unplanned, if you like, holistic observations. And I'm going to share my screen now to look at the early years educator competencies. So here we can see this is taken from early years educator criteria 1.1. And it's taken from assignment 2, part 1. And this is looking at children's holistic development. And the criteria is telling us that a professional discussion is allowed. So yes, we're looking at holistic development, but these things can be seen quite spontaneously. So any experience, any activity, structured, unstructured, planned, unplanned, is going to be taken on board through an element of child-led activity and interest. And that's exactly how it should be. So in this particular scenario, where we look at what a professional discussion may look like, Stacy is in the role of the assessor, and Angie in the role of the student. And of course, the wide range of cognition, speech, language and communication development, literacy and numeracy, physical development, emotional development, social development, neurological and brain development. 1.1 of the early years educator criteria is very challenging and very stretchy over that sort of 0 to the age of 7 in terms of that knowledge base. So professional discussion is really about how do we use that. We don't want the student to rely heavily on a script that will be able to tell Stacy all about development from 0 to 7. We would rather see an application of understanding, an application of knowledge and skill, so that Angie is able to explain perhaps how that range is covered. So over to you guys.
Angie, I've just observed a lovely storytelling session where you used a lot of speech, language and communication development. How can your storytelling allow for holistic development in 3 and 4-year-olds?
Well, for a start, we could really consider when we're doing it outside, and we've got a lovely, the lovely story space that we have. I really encourage the children to use their senses. So we consider what they can smell during that story time, what they can hear, the thinking about the sounds around them, all of those that will stimulate their senses. For me, I think is really important. But that can then be extended for the older children when you think about how that can inspire their creative writing by taking them outside so that they can really get their senses, sort of going really and thinking about those smells and those sounds. But also for the younger children and bringing in sort of role play, so providing them with resources that we have, and we can take them sort of in that outside space for them to explore, and sort of bring the story alive, really.
Fantastic. And you've answered that second question that I had there about how you can adapt that particular activity for younger children and for older children. So thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Stacy. That's great. What we're going to do now is look perhaps at a different example, and this time we'll look more at a structured opportunity. So let's take a look at a different document this time. And I'm going to take something now from the structured observations. So as we can see here, contributing to an enabling environment is structured observation 2 from assignment 2 of the early years educator occupational specialism. So as we look at this one now, we can see if we scroll down slightly, that this is going to allow for professional discussion. And it's always really important, as I said before, make sure that the observation that you're looking at, whether that's structured or whether it's taken from the early years educator criteria of assignment 2 part 1, that professional discussion is allowed, and in what context is it allowed. If we scroll down here, it tells us, in fact, how we can use some professional discussion. So okay, sorry, keep going. Professional discussion is allowed. Let's have a look here. So we've got some ideas of how professional discussion can be used to complement. So a student may well have shown some indication of this particular assessment criteria, but it needs to be strengthened. And the way that we would strengthen what we've seen quite naturally is through a discussion, a professional discussion following the observation. So it makes perfect sense. And you would need to do this professional discussion after you've observed within the environment, because this is part of a graded sort of session, and it's important that these two things happen spontaneously. Okay, so I believe this time Angie is going to be our assessor or tutor, and Stacy is our student. So over to you. Thank you.
Okay, so I've seen many types of interaction that you have had with the children, but what I'd like you to do now is actually reflect on your practice, and I want you to consider ways in which you've used holistic observations to really help plan for those next steps in order to meet the diverse needs of the children in your care, so that you can tailor sort of provision for them.
Okay, observations really help because they help me to get to know the child better. So when I know that child, I can plan for their interests and use those interests as a motivation for their learning. I can also identify any gaps